Myself, Douglas, for Nikki, anyone who'd like to, please.
Prices of comic books and they're easy, and kids really don't have money to buy it.
You're talking about like the price of new comics and things like that? Yeah, I think they haven't increased as disproportionately as people think. If you go back to World War II when comics are a dime and Time Magazine is a dime, and go look at the price of Time Magazine today and the price of comics today, they're not disproportionate, but I don't argue that they're expensive. I think one of the reasons they seem expensive is they're largely not written as well, though there's certainly hundreds of examples of them being written in spectacular fashion. The average comic reads too quickly. When you spend $2.99 and it takes you 10 seconds, because if you look at just the difference between, who here has learned words from Stan Lee? I mean, the thing is, I don't think it's that hard not to write down to people. But when you pick up a comic and it takes you 2 minutes to read it, and you spend $2.99 on it, you get no satisfaction. Now, you don't want to get the one that bogs you down and takes you 6 hours because it's so confusing. But you do want it to one that's written intelligently, and I think that's the real answer there. Just like I was talking about my experience with kids looking at comics, more and more kids have either some discretionary spending or allowance, or mom and dad buy them something, even under tough economic times. Kids today, overall, have way more money than they did when I was a kid, at least in my case. I've tried to talk to my parents about it, they deny it. But there's not a quick answer for it that says, hey, drop the price. But the fact is, supply and demand tells us one thing over and over. Look at computer prices or any other kind of electronics. If we can get these more people buying them, there's no reason price can't come down.
But Jason, would you even say that the new comics really are even written for kids the way they were for when
well,
we were
kids? I think one of the things when we were kids, they weren't written down to kids. They were just written. There were lines. There were already comics in the 70s that weren't intended for kids. And most of the ones I write aren't intended for kids. So that's why it's so funny that I'm such an evangelical about this issue. But as the associate publisher of the Disney titles, and as a promoter, I just absolutely know that this has to happen, or we're all going to be getting older.
I think you underestimate the number of kids. Quick question though on that. When is the retreat going to go online?
That is an excellent question. I am not prepared to say anything official about that, except we are serious with trying to get it done.
Thinking out the talk about to me it seems like, I'm trying to get so close to what to me it seems like it's not accessibility. When I was a kid, comics were, they're not. I mean, where does a kid, a kid has to get to the store, all this, and now parents are all, paranoid with their kids, so they can't, be sure for everything.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All the subjects of kidnapping. Anyway, maybe, all right. But anyways, the internet, comics online, Marvel's rolled out that.
Yep.
All right, well, it's like, once upon a time, comics were cutting edge new stuff, Maybe comics online, well, that's like a good question. Do you think comics online would be the next step in having a, graphic storytelling kind of thing that suddenly, kids everywhere are.
Absolutely. There's an economic model that sooner or later somebody's really going to tap into. Comiclex is trying it right now, and they're presenting some great material. I don't know how they make the front end of it work. There's a publishing model at the end where the serialized thing is collected into a graphic novel, and then those will be available through comic shops and bookstores. And I think that's great. I think the DC's obviously experimenting with the Zuda Comics as their online entity. But there is something undeniably cool about the tactile sensation about comics. And again, I was totally going the opposite direction in my life and my belief until I did this thing with going to the coin show. These were not comic book people, these were just average kids. They were there with their parents because their parents were into coins. And handed with that, and I've had other experiences at libraries since then, And people love comics. It is the mechanism about getting them out there. Now, the great thing about it is, if we can figure out how to do this, they'll come to comic shops, because once you get hooked on comics, you want more. It's just like any other drug. A lot of this stuff requires somebody brighter than me to figure out the economics of it. But it is there. Supply and demand always works when it's not in a vacuum. Please.
You know the way newspapers are going, of course. They're
Yes.
increasing and going more and more, and they're all trying to figure out how to get themselves out on the tube.
Yeah, absolutely.
or other. And is that the way the comics are going, perhaps? I mean, rather than
In the terms of the individual issues, for some things, I can't imagine a time reaching a time where there's not an issue of Superman. But the economics of some new character that's not as well known certainly suggests that at least before there's a collected edition in book form, that online is a totally satisfactory way to do that in some sense. I personally think that there's probably room for all of this. You know,
the experience of newspapers, which is appalling. I don't like to read a newspaper on the tube, but I didn't read the New York Times right there. Touch it and feel it. But that's, I'm 80. I mean, how about a 16-year-old?
Well,
Not 16, but let me ask you, are you just as happy to read from the tube as you are on the printed page?
The computer.
Was